Naomi Carter thought the crisis was over, but Riverton still hid a darker truth. While the town healed, powerful figures had quietly profited from suffering, leaving the poorest behind. When Naomi uncovered missing supplies and rising prices, she became a target. Accused and dragged into court, she stood alone until she revealed undeniable proof that changed everything. This is a story about courage, truth, and the cost of doing what is right. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. The winter wind cut through Riverton, Ohio like a blade. Snow gathered in uneven piles along empty sidewalks, and the distant wail of ambulance sirens echoed through the gray morning air. The town felt like it was holding its breath, waiting, hoping, and quietly breaking. Inside a small, dimly lit apartment above a closed laundromat, Naomi Carter stood by the window, watching a stretcher being loaded into an ambulance across the street. Naomi Carter was 29 years old, a black investigative journalist with a calm but intense presence. She stood at medium height with a lean, steady posture, her deep brown skin glowing softly under the pale winter light. Her face was oval-shaped, with defined cheekbones and full lips that often pressed together when she was thinking. Her dark brown eyes were sharp, observant, almost too observant, and her tightly coiled black hair was tied back into a low bun. She dressed simply, a dark coat, jeans, practical boots. But what defined Naomi wasn't her appearance. It was the quiet weight she carried. She had grown up just a few blocks from where she stood now, in a neighborhood where survival often came before dreams. Her mother had worked 2 jobs. Her father had left early, and Naomi had learned, at a young age, that the system didn't fail everyone equally. It failed some people faster. That understanding had shaped her into the kind of journalist who didn't just report stories. She chased truths others avoided. She picked up her notebook from the small kitchen table, flipping through pages filled with numbers, names, and questions. Something wasn't right. Outside, a man shouted for help, his voice cracking in the cold air. Naomi's gaze followed the sound. Across the street, near a cluster of makeshift tents, a small group of people huddled together. That was where the forgotten lived. The Riverton General Hospital stood just 3 blocks away, its emergency entrance crowded with vehicles and exhausted staff moving in and out like shadows. Inside, Dr. Daniel Brooks adjusted his gloves for what felt like the 100th time that morning. Daniel Brooks was 32, a young doctor with a tall, slightly lean build that had grown thinner over the past few weeks. His once neatly kept dark hair was now slightly messy, falling over tired eyes that carried deep circles beneath them. His skin was a warm, brown tone, and his face, sharp, thoughtful, was now lined with exhaustion. He wore his white coat like armor, though it was wrinkled and stained from long shifts. Daniel had always been the kind of person who believed in structure, in systems that worked. He had graduated near the top of his class, full of optimism, convinced that medicine was a place where effort equaled impact. But this crisis had changed something in him. The rules didn't seem to apply anymore. Patients were coming in faster than they could be treated, and the supplies didn't make sense. "Where are the oxygen tanks?" a nurse called out. Daniel turned sharply. "We ordered more 3 days ago." They never arrived. That wasn't the first time he had heard that sentence. He clenched his jaw slightly, saying nothing, but something inside him began to shift. Later that afternoon, Naomi stepped into the cold again, pulling her coat tighter around her as she made her way toward the tent encampment. The snow crunched beneath her boots. A man sat near a small fire barrel, wrapped in layers of worn clothing. His hands trembled slightly as he held them close to the flame. "Mr. Reed?" Naomi asked gently. The man looked up. Mr. Elijah Reed was 72 years old, an African-American man with a thin, fragile frame. His skin was deep brown, marked with wrinkles that told the story of a long, difficult life. His face was narrow, his lips thin, and his eyes dark and tired, still carried a quiet dignity. His gray hair was uneven, peeking out from under a faded wool cap. He wore an old army jacket, worn at the edges, with patches that had long since lost their color. He had once been a soldier, a man who had served his country. Now he sat in the cold, waiting for help that never came. "You're the reporter," he said slowly, his voice rough but steady. Naomi nodded. "I just want to understand what's happening out here." Elijah gave a faint, humorless smile. "What's happening? People are getting sick, and the ones who can't pay—" He paused, looking toward one of the tents. "They don't make it." Naomi crouched slightly, her expression tightening. "Did anyone bring supplies? Medicine? Masks?" Elijah shook his head. "Not for us. We hear about shipments, trucks coming in, but somehow—" He gestured weakly. "It never reaches here." Naomi wrote that down. "Never reaches here." Across town, a delivery truck idled quietly behind a warehouse. Marcus Carter leaned back in the driver's seat, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. Marcus was 26, Naomi's younger brother. He had a solid, athletic build, slightly taller than Naomi, with broad shoulders and a relaxed but alert posture. His skin was a warm brown, and his face, rounded but defined, carried a mix of charm and caution. His short black hair was closely trimmed, and his dark eyes moved constantly, always watching. He wore a simple delivery uniform, layered under a thick jacket. Marcus had grown up alongside Naomi, but where she had turned toward words, he had turned toward movement, toward work that kept him going, kept him out of trouble. He wasn't reckless, but he wasn't blind either. And lately, things didn't feel right. He checked the delivery manifest again. The boxes in the back were labeled medical supplies, oxygen regulators, masks, sanitizers. Essential. He had made this route before. But today, the instructions were different. "New drop-off location," his supervisor had said. Marcus frowned, looking out at the quiet street. This wasn't a hospital. It wasn't even a clinic. It was just a warehouse. The back doors opened, and two men stepped out, both wearing dark jackets, their faces partially covered. They moved quickly, unloading the boxes without saying much. Marcus stepped out of the truck. "Hey, this shipment was supposed to go to Riverton General." One of the men glanced at him briefly. "Plans changed?" "That's not what the paperwork says." The man stepped closer, his tone calm but firm. "You just drive, that's your job." Marcus held his gaze for a moment, then slowly nodded. But he didn't forget. That night, Naomi sat at her small table, the room quiet except for the faint hum of the heater. Her notebook lay open. She stared at the numbers. Prices of masks, up 5 times. Oxygen tanks, 10 times. Sanitizer, almost impossible to find. She flipped to another page. Hospital shortages, missing shipments, unreached communities. Her pen hovered over the paper. Then she wrote one sentence slowly. "Who is controlling the supply?" Her phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. "Something's wrong with the deliveries." Naomi's eyes narrowed slightly. Outside, another ambulance siren cut through the night. The town was still holding its breath, and Naomi Carter was starting to see why. Bao Gao, this is. The next morning, in Riverton arrived without warmth. The snow had stopped, but the sky remained a dull, heavy gray, pressing down on the town like a silent weight. Naomi Carter stepped out of her apartment early, her notebook tucked under her arm, her mind already racing ahead of her steps. The sirens were fewer today, but that didn't mean things were better. It only meant people had stopped calling as often. She walked with purpose, retracing the fragments from the night before, missing shipments, rising prices, and one simple question that refused to leave her mind. Who was controlling the supply? Naomi didn't start with assumptions. She started with records. Inside a small government office building, the air smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant. The clerk behind the counter barely looked up as Naomi requested access to public distribution logs. It took time, forms, signatures, waiting. But Naomi was patient. She had learned that truth rarely revealed itself to those in a hurry. Stacks of documents eventually landed in front of her. Invoices, shipment logs, allocation records. At first glance, everything appeared normal. But Naomi wasn't looking for what was obvious. She was looking for patterns. She flipped page after page, her fingers moving faster as her eyes sharpened. Then she slowed. A name. It appeared once, then again. Hale Distribution Group. Naomi leaned back slightly, her expression tightening. She pulled out her pen and circled it. Every major shipment, oxygen tanks, masks, sanitizers, had passed through the same company. Every single one. That's not a coincidence, she murmured under her breath. Across town, Riverton General Hospital was quieter than the day before, but the quiet felt wrong. Dr. Daniel Brooks stood in a storage room staring at shelves that should have been full. Instead, they were half empty. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his movements slower now, heavier. He held a clipboard, comparing numbers. On paper, the hospital had received everything it needed. The records showed deliveries completed. Supplies accounted for. But reality told a different story. Daniel. He turned. Standing in the doorway was Emily Dawson. Emily Dawson was 28 years old, a registered nurse with a slim build and a soft but determined presence. She had fair skin with a light scattering of freckles across her nose, and her blonde hair was tied back into a slightly messy ponytail. Her blue eyes were gentle, but there was a quiet strength behind them, something sharpened by months of exhaustion. She spoke calmly, but there was always an undercurrent of urgency in her voice. Emily had grown up in Riverton, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a mechanic. She had always believed in doing things the right way, even when it was harder. But lately, she had started to realize that the right way wasn't always enough. "You're looking at the supply logs again," she said softly. Daniel exhaled. "They say we received 40 oxygen tanks this week." Emily glanced at the shelves. "We have 12. Daniel nodded slowly. "And no one can tell me where the rest went." Emily hesitated for a moment, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Because no one's asking the right questions." Daniel looked at her, something shifting in his expression. Emily reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I copied this last night," she said. "It's the intake log before it gets processed into the system." Daniel unfolded it. The numbers didn't match, not even close. He looked up at her, his voice quieter now. "You're saying it's being changed?" Emily nodded slightly. "Before it becomes official." Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Later that afternoon, Naomi stepped into a small local archive office, following another thread from the documents she had reviewed. If Hale Distribution was involved, she needed to know everything about it. A woman sat behind the desk, typing slowly on an old computer. "Can I help you?" she asked without looking up. Naomi smiled politely. "I'm looking for business registration records, Hale Distribution Group." The woman paused, then finally looked up. Her name tag read, Margaret Ellis. Margaret Ellis was in her late 50s with a tall, slightly rigid posture. Her gray-streaked brown hair was cut short, framing a narrow face with thin lips and observant green eyes. She wore simple office clothing, but there was something precise about her, everything in place, everything controlled. She had worked in this office for decades and had seen enough to know when something wasn't ordinary. She studied Naomi for a moment. "Reporter?" Naomi didn't answer directly, just someone asking questions. Margaret held her gaze for a second longer, then turned back to her computer. "You're not the first," she said quietly. Naomi's expression sharpened. "What do you mean?" Margaret clicked a few keys, pulling up a file. "Hale Distribution has been expanding fast. Too fast. Contracts, exclusive deals, government approvals." She paused. "Everything moves through them now." Naomi stepped closer. "Everything?" Margaret nodded. "Medical supplies, emergency equipment, even some food distribution. Naomi felt the pieces beginning to connect. "Who runs it?" she asked. Margaret turned the screen slightly. Victor Hale. Naomi stared at the name. Victor Hale was not the kind of man who appeared chaotic. He was calculated. In the photograph attached to the file, he stood tall, with a broad but controlled build. He was in his early 50s with fair skin and a sharply defined face. His hair was dark, with streaks of gray at the temples, neatly styled. His eyes, cold, focused, gave away very little. He wore expensive suits, always perfectly tailored. Victor Hale had built his reputation on efficiency, on reliability. He was known as the man who kept Riverton running during the crisis. But Naomi had learned something long ago. The people who controlled systems rarely looked like villains. They looked like solutions. Across the industrial district, Marcus Carter parked his truck again, his mind replaying the conversation from the day before. He stepped out, scanning the area more carefully this time, the same warehouse, the same silence. But today, someone was waiting. A man leaned against the side of the building, arms crossed. He was taller than Marcus, with a heavy build that suggested strength rather than speed. His skin was pale, his jaw square, and his expression unreadable. He wore a dark coat, gloves, and a cap pulled low over his eyes. As Marcus approached, the man straightened slightly. "You're asking too many questions," he said calmly. Marcus stopped. "I just follow instructions," Marcus replied, keeping his tone neutral. The man stepped closer. "Then follow them. Don't think about them." Marcus met his gaze. "I'm just trying to do my job." The man smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. "Exactly," he said, "so keep it that way." Marcus said nothing, but as he walked away, his jaw tightened. This wasn't just a job anymore. That evening, Naomi sat at her table again, but this time the pieces were clearer. Hale Distribution Group. Every shipment passed through them. Hospital records didn't match reality. And now, Marcus was seeing it too. Her phone buzzed again. A new message. Unknown number. "If you want to know the truth, stop looking at the surface." Naomi's eyes narrowed. Then another message followed. "Meet me tomorrow, alone." Attached was a location. Naomi stared at it for a long moment. Then she closed her notebook. Because now, she wasn't just asking questions anymore. Someone had noticed, and someone was ready to talk. The morning Naomi Carter published her article, Riverton looked almost peaceful. The snow had softened overnight, covering the streets in a quiet white calm that hid everything beneath it. Footprints, stains, and the invisible damage left behind. For a few hours it almost felt like the town was healing. But Naomi knew better. She sat at her small kitchen table, her laptop still open, the headline staring back at her. Where did the supplies go? A crisis behind the crisis in Riverton. Naomi had chosen her words carefully. Not accusations yet. Just facts, patterns, questions that couldn't be ignored. Her article detailed the missing shipments, the inflated prices, the unexplained gaps between official records and reality. She mentioned Hale Distribution Group, not as a criminal entity but as a central player that needed answers. It wasn't explosive, but it was enough. Her phone began to buzz within minutes of publication. Messages, emails, notifications. Some were supportive, others were not. Naomi leaned back slightly, her expression unreadable. She had expected this. Truth didn't arrive quietly. Across town, inside Riverton General Hospital, Daniel Brooks stood near the break room, staring at his phone. He had read Naomi's article twice. Daniel's face, already worn from weeks of exhaustion, tightened further as he processed the details. His dark eyes moved slowly across the screen, stopping at every line that reflected what he had seen with his own eyes. Missing supplies, altered records, unanswered questions. Emily Dawson stood beside him, arms folded tightly across her chest. "She said it," Emily whispered. Out loud. Daniel nodded slowly. Yeah. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then a voice cut through the silence. Dr. Brooks. Daniel turned. Standing in the doorway was Dr. Leonard Hayes. Dr. Leonard Hayes was in his early 50s, the hospital's administrative director. He had a tall, slightly rigid posture, with thinning gray hair combed neatly back, and a pale, tired face that rarely showed emotion. His lips were thin, his eyes a dull gray that seemed to observe without ever truly engaging. He wore a perfectly pressed suit under his lab coat, someone who cared more about order than empathy. He had built his career on structure, on control, and above all, on keeping things contained. "We need to talk," Hayes said. Daniel exchanged a quick glance with Emily before stepping forward. Inside Hayes's office, the air felt colder. Hayes closed the door behind them. "I assume you've seen the article," he said calmly. Daniel nodded. "Yes." Hayes walked slowly behind his desk, placing his hands flat on the surface. "Then you understand how dangerous this is." Daniel frowned slightly. Dangerous or true? Hayes's eyes lifted, locking onto his. "That's not the question you should be asking," Hayes replied quietly. The room fell silent. Hayes stepped closer. "You're a good doctor, Daniel. You have a future here. But if you start entertaining ideas like this," he gestured vaguely toward the outside world, "you risk more than just your position." Daniel's jaw tightened. Hayes's voice softened slightly, but the weight behind it didn't change. "Focus on your patients. Leave the rest alone." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning. Later that day, Naomi walked into the Riverton press office, the atmosphere noticeably different from usual. Conversations stopped as she passed. Eyes followed her, some with curiosity, others with concern. At the far end of the room stood her editor, Thomas Keller. Thomas Keller was in his early 40s, a man of average height with a slightly stocky build and a face that always seemed caught between stress and responsibility. His dark hair was beginning to thin, and his brown eyes carried the weight of someone who had spent years balancing truth and survival. He wore rolled-up sleeves and a loosened tie, the uniform of a man constantly under pressure. "Naomi," he said, motioning her into his office. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Thomas didn't sit. He paced once, then turned. "You should have told me you were publishing this today." Naomi met his gaze. "Would it have changed anything?" Thomas hesitated. "Yes," he admitted, "I would have told you to wait." Naomi shook her head slightly. "People are dying, Thomas." "I know that," he snapped, then immediately softened. "I know, but this—" He gestured toward her article on his screen. "This puts us in a position we're not ready for." Naomi crossed her arms. "Or maybe it puts us exactly where we need to be." Thomas exhaled slowly. "You're already getting attention," he said. "Not just from readers." Naomi's expression didn't change. "Who?" Thomas hesitated for a fraction of a second. "City officials," he said carefully. "They want to speak with you." Naomi felt it then. The shift. This was no longer just a story. That evening, Naomi stood outside City Hall, the cold wind pulling at her coat. The building loomed in front of her, clean, polished, untouched by the chaos affecting the rest of Riverton. Inside, everything was warm, orderly, controlled. She was led down a long hallway into a private office, and that's where she saw him. Mayor Richard Whitmore. Richard Whitmore was a man in his early 60s, tall, with a composed, dignified posture. His silver-gray hair was neatly styled, his face structured with sharp lines softened only slightly by age. His blue-gray eyes were calm, almost reassuring at first glance, but there was something deeper behind them, something calculating. He wore a perfectly tailored dark suit, his presence projecting authority without needing to raise his voice. He had been Riverton's mayor for over a decade. To most people, he was a symbol of stability, a leader who had guided the town through difficult times. He smiled as Naomi entered. "Miss Carter," he said warmly, "thank you for coming." Naomi didn't return the smile. "You asked to see me." Whitmore gestured toward a chair. "Please." She remained standing. Whitmore's smile didn't fade, but it changed. Slightly. "I read your article," he said. "It's compelling." Naomi said nothing. Whitmore stepped closer, his tone calm, almost conversational. "But in times like these, words carry weight. People are scared. They're looking for reassurance, not speculation." Naomi's voice was steady. "I don't deal in speculation." Whitmore nodded slowly. "Of course. But even facts, when presented without full context, can cause unnecessary panic." Naomi held his gaze. Then maybe the full context should be shared. For the first time, Whitmore's expression tightened, just slightly. He turned away for a moment, walking toward the window. "Riverton is recovering," he said quietly. "We've worked hard to maintain stability, to keep order." He turned back. "And I would hate for that to be disrupted." The meaning was clear. Naomi didn't move. "I'm not here to maintain comfort," she said. "I'm here to tell the truth." Whitmore studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled again, but this time there was no warmth in it. "I hope," he said softly, "that you understand the responsibility that comes with that." Naomi didn't respond. She turned and walked out. That night, the temperature dropped even further. In the tent encampment, the small fires burned lower. Marcus stood at the edge of the street, watching from a distance. He had started noticing it more now. The same car, parked too long, moving when he moved. He didn't say anything, but he knew. He was being watched. Near the center of the encampment, a small group had gathered. The air was still. Too still. Naomi arrived moments later, her steps slowing as she saw the faces. Silent, heavy. Someone stepped forward. "He's gone," a voice said quietly. Naomi felt her chest tighten. She moved through the small crowd. And there he was. Mr. Elijah Reed lay still, wrapped in blankets that hadn't been enough. His face was calm, but the cold had taken him. No medicine, no oxygen, no help. Naomi knelt slightly, her hands tightening into fists. This wasn't just a story anymore, it was a cost, and people were paying it. The cold in Riverton no longer felt like weather. It felt like pressure. Tight, suffocating, closing in from all sides. 2 days had passed since Elijah Reed's death, but the silence he left behind lingered heavier than the snow. Naomi Carter stood in front of her mirror that morning, adjusting the collar of a plain gray coat she didn't usually wear. Her reflection looked the same, but her role had changed. She wasn't just observing anymore. She was stepping inside. Naomi tied her hair differently this time, looser, slightly less structured. She removed the small press badge she normally carried and placed it in a drawer. Her clothes were deliberately unremarkable, neutral tones, practical, forgettable. A small leather folder rested in her hands filled with carefully selected documents, enough to make her look legitimate, but not enough to expose her true intent. She exhaled once, then left. The Hale Distribution headquarters stood on the edge of Riverton's industrial district, a large steel and glass building that looked more like a corporate fortress than a supply center. Clean lines, guarded entrances, security cameras placed with precision. Everything about it suggested control. Naomi approached the front desk with steady steps. A woman sat behind it, typing quickly without looking up. "Name?" she asked. "Nicole Harris," Naomi replied without hesitation. The name came easily. She had practiced it. The receptionist glanced up briefly. Her name tag read Carla Jensen. Carla Jensen appeared to be in her mid-30s with a neat professional appearance. She had light brown hair pulled into a tight bun, sharp facial features, and a composed, efficient demeanor. Her eyes were quick, always scanning, always measuring. She wasn't unfriendly, but she wasn't warm either. Just precise. "Appointment?" Carla asked. Naomi slid the folder forward slightly. "I'm here about a bulk purchase request. I was told to speak with someone in procurement." Carla studied her for a moment longer than necessary, then picked up the phone. "Send someone down," she said quietly. Minutes later, a man stepped out from a secured hallway. Ethan Cole. Ethan Cole was in his early 40s, medium height with a solid build that suggested both discipline and experience. His dark hair was neatly styled, his face clean-shaven with a slightly sharp jawline. His brown eyes were calm, but there was a subtle edge behind them. Something alert. Something cautious. He wore a dark suit without a tie, his posture relaxed but controlled. He smiled politely. "Nicole Harris?" Naomi nodded. Ethan extended a hand. "Ethan Cole, procurement." His grip was firm, but not aggressive. Professional. "Come with me," he said. The interior of the building was quieter than Naomi expected. Too quiet. Hallways were wide, floors polished, everything spotless. But there were very few people, and the ones she did see moved quickly, avoiding unnecessary interaction. Ethan walked slightly ahead, guiding her through multiple security doors. "You're looking to buy in bulk?" he asked casually. "Yes," Naomi replied. "Regional distribution, smaller clinics." Ethan nodded. "Demand's high right now." "So I've noticed." He glanced at her briefly, then looked forward again. "Most people don't realize how complicated supply chains can be," he said. "Delays happen. Adjustments are made." Naomi's voice remained steady. "Adjustments that increase prices 5 times over?" Ethan didn't respond immediately. They stopped in front of a large room. "Let's talk numbers first," he said, opening the door. Inside, rows of desks filled the space, but only a handful were occupied. Screens flickered with spreadsheets, shipment schedules, and inventory lists. Naomi sat down as Ethan placed her folder on the table. "Let me see what we can do," he said. As he began reviewing her documents, Naomi's eyes moved, scanning, observing. A second monitor behind Ethan caught her attention. Numbers, columns, 2 sets. One labeled official, the other no label at all. But the differences were clear. Quantities didn't match. Prices didn't match. Naomi's heartbeat slowed, not from fear, but from focus. There it was. Not suspicion. Proof. Across town, Marcus Carter parked his truck further away than usual this time. He wasn't supposed to be here, which meant he had to be careful. From his position, he could see the same warehouse from before, but today, something was different. More activity. 2 trucks and a security vehicle parked near the entrance. Marcus leaned slightly forward, watching. Boxes were being unloaded quickly, but not into the main warehouse. They were being moved to a smaller building behind it, unmarked. Marcus frowned. "That's new," he muttered. He pulled out his phone, pretending to check messages while angling it slightly. Recording. Back inside Hale Distribution, Naomi followed Ethan out of the office space. "Inventory's tight," he said, "but we might be able to prioritize your order." Naomi nodded. "What determines a priority?" Ethan hesitated. Just for a second, then continued walking. "Long-term partnerships, volume commitments." Naomi didn't press. Not yet. As they turned a corner, a door down the hallway stood slightly open. Inside, shelves, stacks of boxes fully stocked. Naomi slowed her steps just enough to look. Oxygen tanks, masks, sanitizers, everything the hospital was missing, everything the streets needed. Right there. Ethan noticed. He stopped. "Restricted access," he said calmly, stepping slightly between her and the door. Naomi nodded as if it meant nothing. But inside, everything shifted. Later that evening, Riverton General Hospital felt even heavier. Daniel Brooks stood in a quiet corner of the ward, holding a small recorder in his hand. He looked at it for a long moment, then pressed record. "Patient admitted, male, mid-60s, severe respiratory failure. No oxygen available on arrival." His voice was steady, but something in it had changed. "This is the 3rd case today." He lowered the recorder slightly. This wasn't just documentation anymore, this was evidence. Across the hall, Emily Dawson moved quickly between rooms, her face pale but determined. She had done something she never thought she would do. She had accessed restricted system logs, copied them, saved them onto a small drive hidden in her pocket. As she walked, she kept her expression neutral, normal, but her heart beat faster, because now, she was part of it too. Back near the industrial district, Marcus watched as one of the trucks pulled away from the warehouse, but instead of heading toward the hospital, it turned in the opposite direction, toward the wealthier side of Riverton. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Of course," he whispered. He started his engine, keeping distance, following. That night, Naomi sat alone again. But this time, her notebook looked different, more complete, more dangerous. She flipped to a clean page and wrote 3 lines. Double records. Hidden storage. Selective distribution. Then she added one more. Priority list. She closed the notebook slowly, because now, she wasn't just chasing a story. She was inside it. Night fell over Riverton like a curtain pulled too quickly. The streets emptied faster now, not because people felt safe, but because they had learned not to be seen. Snow had turned into a thin layer of ice, reflecting the dim streetlights in fractured patterns. Naomi Carter stood across from the Hale distribution building, her figure partially hidden in the shadow of an abandoned storefront. Her breath was steady, controlled. Her eyes were not. Tonight wasn't about questions. It was about proof. She adjusted the small camera clipped discreetly inside her coat. It wasn't professional equipment, just something compact, reliable, easy to conceal. But Naomi had learned long ago that truth didn't need perfection. It just needed to be undeniable. Her phone vibrated once, a message from the same unknown number that had contacted her before. Tonight, rear entrance, 10:40 p.m., don't be late. Naomi checked the time. 10:37. She stepped forward. The back of the Hale distribution building was darker, less polished than the front. Fewer lights, fewer cameras, or at least fewer visible ones. Naomi moved carefully, keeping her steps measured, her posture natural. Then she saw him. A man standing near the service entrance, partially obscured by shadow. Caleb Foster. Caleb Foster appeared to be in his mid-30s, with a tall, slightly lean frame and restless energy in the way he shifted his weight. His brown hair was unkempt, his face pale with tension, and his eyes, green, sharp, constantly scanning, betrayed a man who hadn't slept well in days. He wore a dark hoodie under a worn jacket, his hands shoved into his pockets as if trying to steady himself. "You came alone?" he asked quietly. Naomi nodded. "You're the one who sent the messages." Caleb hesitated, then nodded once. "Yeah." His voice was low, cautious. "I work inside," he said, "logistics. Not high level, but enough to see things I shouldn't." Naomi studied him carefully. "Why help me?" Caleb let out a short breath. "Because people are dying, and I'm tired of pretending I don't know why." There was no heroism in his tone, just exhaustion. He glanced around once, then motioned slightly. "You don't have much time." Inside, the building felt different at night, quieter, but not empty. Naomi followed Caleb through a narrow corridor, past doors marked with codes and security panels. The deeper they went, the more controlled everything felt. Caleb stopped at a locked office. "This is where they keep the internal logs," he said. He pulled out a key card, hesitated for a fraction of a second, then swiped it. The door clicked open. Inside, the room was small but dense with information. 2 computers, filing cabinets, a printer quietly humming in standby mode. Caleb moved quickly. "You didn't get this from me," he said, opening a drawer. Naomi stepped closer. Inside, documents. Stacks of them, invoices, shipment records, 2 versions of everything. One labeled, one not. Naomi's fingers moved fast now, flipping through pages. Numbers didn't match. Dates didn't match. Destinations didn't match. This is it. she whispered. Caleb nodded. That's just the surface. He pointed to a specific file. Naomi opened it. A list. Names, addresses, marked under a header. Priority distribution. Her eyes moved down the page. Private clinics, luxury residences, corporate offices, not hospitals, not shelters, not where the need was greatest. Naomi felt something cold settle in her chest. This is how they decide, Caleb said quietly. Who gets what? And who doesn't? Naomi pulled out a small scanner device, quickly copying the documents. Every page, every detail. Because this was more than evidence. This was intent. Wait, Caleb said suddenly, his voice tightening. Footsteps. Distant, but getting closer. Naomi froze. Caleb moved fast, closing the drawer, stepping back. Go, he whispered. Now! Naomi didn't hesitate. She slipped the copied files into her coat and moved toward the door. But before she left, she looked back. Be careful, she said. Caleb didn't respond. He was already erasing traces. Outside, the cold hit harder. Naomi stepped into the darkness, her heart steady but her mind racing. She had the documents. But she needed more. Something undeniable, something no one could explain away. Across town, Marcus Carter's headlights cut through the night as he followed the same truck from earlier. It had taken him nearly 20 minutes to realize the pattern. The truck wasn't just making deliveries, it was avoiding certain places, specifically hospitals. Marcus kept his distance, his hands gripping the wheel slightly tighter. Then, suddenly, the truck slowed. Too fast. Marcus frowned. That's not right. Before he could react, another vehicle pulled out from a side street, blocking his path. Marcus slammed the brakes. The door of the other car opened. A man stepped out. Then another. Marcus's pulse spiked. Yeah, he muttered under his breath, that's definitely not right. The first man approached his window. Marcus didn't open it. The man knocked once. Hard. Marcus lowered the window slightly. You're following the wrong road, the man said calmly. Marcus forced a neutral expression. Just driving. The second man moved closer now. Too close. Marcus didn't wait. He hit the gas. The engine roared as he swerved past them, the car behind him barely missing his rear bumper. For a moment, everything blurred. Then, silence. Marcus didn't slow down, but his hands shook slightly on the wheel. They knew. Back near Hale Distribution, Naomi had almost reached the corner when she saw headlights approaching the rear entrance. She stopped, stepped back into the shadows. A black car pulled up. The engine idled. Then, the door opened. Victor Hale stepped out. Even in the dim light, he was unmistakable. Tall, composed, controlled. But he wasn't alone. From the other side of the car, Mayor Richard Whitmore. Naomi's breath slowed. Her hand moved instinctively to the camera. This was it. Victor walked to the trunk, opened it, reached inside and pulled out a dark briefcase, heavy. He turned. Whitmore stepped forward. No words, no hesitation. The briefcase changed hands. Clean, simple, final. Naomi didn't move, didn't blink. The camera captured everything. The exchange, the silence, the truth. Inside Riverton General, Daniel Brooks sat alone in a quiet office, staring at his laptop screen. The data Emily had given him was open. He had spent hours organizing it, cross-referencing, verifying. There was no doubt anymore. He opened a secure browser, entered a federal reporting portal. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then, he uploaded everything. No name, no identity, just the truth. He leaned back, slowly, because now it was out of his hands. At the edge of the city, another figure watched everything unfold from a distance. Officer Liam Carter. Liam Carter was 34, a police officer with a tall, athletic build and a composed but thoughtful presence. His short brown hair was neatly trimmed, and his face, defined but approachable, carried the kind of quiet seriousness that came from years of trying to do the right thing in complicated situations. His blue eyes were observant, often noticing details others ignored. He stood beside his patrol car, arms crossed, watching, not intervening. Not yet. But something in his expression had changed, because he had seen enough, and he had started asking questions. Naomi stood alone in the cold, the camera still in her hand. She looked down at it, then back at the empty street. The documents, the video, the pattern. It was all there. Not suspicion, not theory, proof. The morning of the trial arrived under a pale, colorless sky. Riverton felt different. Not quieter, not louder, but tighter. As if the entire town had been pulled into a single moment that no one could avoid. Snow had melted into slush along the sidewalks, and people gathered in small clusters outside the courthouse, their voices low, uncertain. Some came out of curiosity. Others came because they had read Naomi Carter's article and wanted answers. And some came because they already knew the truth, but had never seen anyone brave enough to say it out loud. Naomi stood at the base of the courthouse steps, her posture straight, her expression calm. She wore a dark coat over a simple blouse, her hair tied back neatly again, the way she used to wear it when she still believed professionalism alone could protect her. Today, it wasn't about protection. It was about standing. Beside her stood attorney Rebecca Langford. Rebecca Langford was in her early 40s, tall and composed with a lean frame and a presence that carried quiet authority. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a low, precise bun, and her sharp hazel eyes missed nothing. She had a reputation in Riverton as someone who didn't take cases lightly and didn't lose easily. Years ago, she had built her career defending corporate clients, but a case involving a wrongful eviction during the early days of the crisis had shifted something in her. Since then, she had chosen her battles carefully, and this was one of them. "You still have time to walk away," Rebecca said quietly, her tone not discouraging, but honest. Naomi shook her head once. "No." Rebecca studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Then we do this right." They walked inside together. The courtroom was already full. Rows of wooden benches were occupied by townspeople, reporters, and officials. The air carried a low hum of anticipation, broken only by the occasional shuffle of movement. At the front of the room, behind the polished bench, sat the man who would decide how this story unfolded. Judge Harold Whitman. Judge Harold Whitman was 63 years old, a tall man with a solid, commanding build. His silver-gray hair was neatly combed, his face structured with deep lines that spoke of decades of authority. His eyes, blue-gray and sharp, carried little patience and even less tolerance for disruption. He wore his black robe with a rigid dignity, every movement controlled, every word deliberate. He believed in order, in stability, and above all, in protecting the structure that held society together. Naomi took her seat. Across the room sat Victor Hale, perfectly composed, untouched. Next to him, Mayor Richard Whitmore, equally calm, prepared, as if this was just another formality. The proceedings began quickly. The charges were clear: defamation, public misinformation, undermining civic trust during a time of crisis. The prosecutor spoke with confidence, his voice filling the room as he painted Naomi's actions as reckless, dangerous, an irresponsible attempt to create fear where stability was needed. Naomi listened. She didn't react. Because she had already heard all of this, just in quieter rooms behind closed doors. Then Judge Whitman leaned forward slightly, his voice cutting through the room. "Miss Carter," he said sharply, "do you understand the weight of what you have done?" Naomi stood. "Yes, Your Honor." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You have published claims that question the integrity of this city's leadership, at a time when people need reassurance, not doubt." His voice rose. "You are not just writing articles, you are shaping perception, and if those claims are false, the consequences are severe." The room went still. "You are disrupting trust," he continued, his tone hardening. And that is not something this court takes lightly. Naomi didn't lower her gaze. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady. I don't speak without proof. A murmur moved through the courtroom. Judge Whitman's expression tightened. Then I suggest, he said coldly, that you present it. For a brief moment, it looked like Naomi stood alone. No movement, no evidence, just silence. Then, Rebecca Langford stepped forward. Your Honor, she said calmly, the defense would like to submit documentation into evidence. She placed a stack of files onto the table. Copies. Clean. Organized. The judge gestured. Proceed. Naomi opened the first folder. These are internal shipment records from Hale Distribution Group, she said. 2 versions of the same transactions. One official, one unreported. She handed them to the clerk. The room shifted slightly. Victor Hale didn't move, but his eyes changed. Just slightly. Next, Naomi continued. Rebecca nodded once. A screen was brought forward. Naomi took a breath, then pressed play. The video filled the room. Dark, grainy, but clear. Victor Hale, Mayor Whitmore. The exchange, the briefcase, no words needed, no explanation required. Silence followed. Not confusion, not disbelief, recognition. Judge Whitman leaned back slightly, his face unreadable. The prosecutor didn't speak, because there was nothing to argue. Finally, Naomi said, her voice hadn't changed. These are hospital intake records and internal logs. She gestured toward the next set of documents. Provided anonymously, verified independently. Rebecca stepped in smoothly. These records show a discrepancy between reported supply deliveries and actual inventory received, resulting in preventable shortages. The words hung in the air. Preventable. A figure stood from the side of the courtroom. Daniel Brooks. He walked forward slowly, his posture still tired, but his expression clearer than it had been in weeks. I can confirm that, he said. His voice was quiet but firm. We didn't receive what we were told we had. Judge Whitman looked at him sharply. And you are? Dr. Daniel Brooks, Riverton General Hospital. There was no hesitation in his voice now, because he had already made his decision. From the back of the room, another voice followed. Marcus Carter. He stepped forward, his movements controlled, though his eyes still carried the memory of what had happened to him. I drive deliveries, he said, medical shipments. He looked directly ahead. They weren't going where they were supposed to go. The courtroom stirred again. Then, from near the entrance, Officer Liam Carter stepped forward. His uniform was clean, his posture steady, but his expression had shifted, no longer neutral. I've observed irregular transport patterns, he said, unauthorized rerouting, restricted access zones not listed in official records. He paused, then added, It's not standard procedure. The weight of the room changed, not gradually, all at once. What had started as an accusation was now a pattern, a system, a truth. Judge Whitman looked out over the courtroom, his expression no longer as rigid as before, because the structure he believed in had just been cracked open. Naomi stood where she had started, alone, but no longer unsupported. She didn't say anything else because she didn't need to. Everything that mattered had already been shown. The morning after the trial, Riverton did not wake up the same town. The sky was still gray, winter still clinging stubbornly to the streets, but something had shifted. Something quiet, but undeniable. People stepped outside a little slower, not out of fear this time, but out of uncertainty. Conversations began in low voices, then grew stronger, steadier, as the news spread beyond the courthouse walls. By midday it was no longer rumor. It was fact. Victor Hale had been arrested. The Hale Distribution Building, once polished and untouchable, was now surrounded by federal vehicles. Agents moved in and out with purpose, carrying boxes of documents, sealed evidence containers, and devices tagged for investigation. The glass exterior reflected flashing lights instead of quiet authority. Victor Hale walked out of the building in handcuffs. He looked the same as always, upright, composed, his suit perfectly fitted. But something in his face had changed. The control was gone, not completely, not visibly, but enough. His eyes no longer held certainty. A man who had once controlled the flow of survival itself now stood still, guided by others. Inside City Hall, the atmosphere had fractured. Mayor Richard Whitmore stood behind his desk for what would be the last time. The room was immaculate, untouched by the chaos outside. His coat was still neatly hung, his desk perfectly arranged, every detail controlled as if nothing had happened. But everything had. Whitmore looked at his reflection in the dark window. For years, he had believed in balance, in maintaining order, in making decisions that served the greater good. But now, the truth had no place for justification. A knock came at the door. He didn't turn. "Come in." 2 federal agents entered. One of them, Agent Claire Donovan, stepped forward. Claire Donovan was in her late 30s, with a tall, athletic build and a presence that carried quiet authority. Her dark hair was pulled back into a low ponytail, her face sharp and focused, her brown eyes steady and unreadable. She spoke clearly, without hesitation. The kind of person who didn't waste words and didn't miss details. "Mayor Whitmore," she said calmly, "we'll need you to come with us." Whitmore closed his eyes for a brief second, then nodded. No resistance, no argument. Just silence. Across Riverton, change began, not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. Federal distribution trucks arrived first, not hidden, not redirected, delivered openly. Medical supplies were unloaded directly into Riverton General Hospital under supervision. Oxygen tanks, masks, medication, everything that had once been missing, now accounted for. Dr. Daniel Brooks stood at the receiving area, watching as the first shipment was checked and signed. He didn't speak. He just stood there, hands resting at his sides, his shoulders slightly lighter than they had been in weeks. The exhaustion was still there. But something else had taken its place. Relief. Beside him, Emily Dawson checked inventory lists, her movements precise but calmer now. She had slept for the first time in days. Not long, but enough. She looked at Daniel and gave a small nod. "This time," she said quietly. "It's real." Daniel nodded back. "Yeah," he replied, "it is." In another part of the city, Marcus Carter stood beside a different kind of truck. Not corporate, not controlled. This one bore the markings of a relief organization, simple, clear, honest. Boxes were loaded carefully, not hidden, not redirected. Marcus adjusted his jacket, watching as volunteers moved around him. He still carried the same steady presence, the same alert eyes, but the tension that once followed him had eased. A woman approached him, Angela Ruiz. Angela Ruiz was in her early 40s with a medium build and a warm but resilient demeanor. Her dark hair was tied back loosely, and her face carried soft lines shaped by years of community work. Her brown eyes were kind but firm, someone who had spent her life helping others without expecting recognition. She wore a simple jacket with the organization's logo, her movements efficient and purposeful. "You're Marcus, right?" she asked. He nodded. "Heard you know the roads better than anyone." Marcus gave a faint smile. "I know where things are supposed to go." Angela smiled back. "Good, that's exactly what we need." Marcus glanced at the truck, then at the people around him, and for the first time, in a long time, he felt like he was driving toward something that mattered. Near the edge of town, where the tents had once stood in silence, something new had been built. A small space, simple, clean. At its center stood a modest stone marker. Elijah Reed. Naomi Carter stood in front of it, her hands resting loosely at her sides. The wind moved gently now, not sharp, not cutting, just present. Around her, a few people gathered quietly, some who had known him, some who hadn't. but all of them understood what he represented. A life that had been overlooked, a cost that should never have existed. Naomi didn't speak. She didn't need to, because this was part of the truth too. Weeks later, Riverton began to look different. Not perfect, but better. The streets were busier. Shops reopened. The hospital no longer felt like it was collapsing under its own weight. And inside a small, renovated space near the center of town, Daniel Brooks adjusted a sign above a doorway. Free Community Clinic. It wasn't large, it wasn't polished, but it was open. Inside, Emily Dawson moved between patients, her movements steady, her voice calm. She had chosen to stay, not just as a nurse, but as someone who understood what it meant to rebuild. In a nearby office, Naomi sat at her desk once more. But this time, the room felt different. Not heavy, not tense, focused. Across from her sat Emily, not in scrubs, but with a notebook, a recorder, and a new sense of purpose. "You ready?" Naomi asked. Emily nodded. "Yeah." Naomi leaned back slightly, a faint smile forming. "Good," she said, "because we're just getting started." Outside, the sun finally broke through the clouds, not fully, not brightly, but enough. Enough to remind the town that light didn't disappear. It just waited. Sometimes the truth does not just expose corruption. It saves lives. In everyday life, we may not face something as big as what happened in Riverton, but we all encounter moments where staying silent feels easier than speaking up. We see unfairness at work, in our communities, or even within our own families. And many times, we tell ourselves it is not our responsibility. But this story reminds us that small acts of courage matter. Asking questions matters. Choosing honesty over comfort matters. Naomi did not win because she was the strongest. She won because she refused to look away. Daniel did not change the system overnight, but he chose to do what was right, even when it cost him. Marcus did not become a hero in a single moment, but he decided to stand on the side of truth. These are choices we can all make, in our own lives, in our own way. We should also reflect on how we treat others, especially those who are struggling. Hard times do not give us the right to take advantage of others. Instead, they are a test of our character. A society becomes stronger not when the powerful win, but when the vulnerable are protected. If this story touched you, take a moment to think about one thing you can do differently today. Be kinder, be fair, speak up when something is wrong. Even a small action can change someone's life. Please share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from, and what part of the story stayed with you the most. If you believe that truth and courage still matter in this world, consider subscribing to the channel so we can continue bringing you meaningful stories. May God bless you and your family with strength, wisdom, and compassion. And if you believe in standing for what is right, even when it is difficult, write Amen in the comments.